How do you find mixing it up with a lot of non-Christians as they discover or you reveal that there's a faith element to your life? How do you navigate that, and what sort of response and reaction do you get from people?
It's so interesting what type of response you get in a world where you get cancelled for having a different opinion to someone else, and particularly when it comes to conversations around faith, that becomes extremely challenging in a work environment.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Monday Movement podcast, where we have deep conversations with Christians who are called to the marketplace. I have a special treat for you and something that I've been really looking forward to. We're having a discussion with Peta Bilton. That surname may sound familiar to you. Yes, she is my daughter, so I'm thoroughly looking forward to this conversation. She's also the founder of Known Impact. She's an ESG expert, and she's a B-Corp Consultant. Peta.
Hello.
So good to see you again. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me back.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about your faith journey. It's great to have you on Lead Well, Live Well. We talked a lot about ESG and some of those things. So if you haven't seen that, go and check it out. We'll give you a link in the description for that as well. But this podcast is really about faith in the marketplace. You moved from operating in the not-for-profit space into the commercial space. From a faith perspective, how did you come to that conclusion, and sort of what made you shift across?
It's a pretty wild story, actually. I was actually, in the not-for-profit and ministry space at the time. I was full-time working in a church and in a ministry not-for-profit, and I loved my job. I'm convinced I had the best job in the whole world. And I, at the same time, felt equally called out of it, which was challenging at the time. And I didn't feel called to anything in particular. I wasn't stepping out of a space and into another one. I simply felt like my time was up where I was at. And that was really hard because, as I said, I loved my job and didn't know where I was going. A friend of mine said, "Hey, you've finished this humanitarian and development type degree, you've done a leadership degree. I know that you're potentially looking for work. The world's shut down during COVID, and would you be happy to help me with this certification that I've got to do for my business? And it has something to do with sustainable development goals, and seems like it's up your alley. Could you help?" So gave it a go, and I loved it. And the distinction for me was that she really didn't want to do it and I really did. So the justice part of me that saw the potential impact of this type of role for the private sector became a really key part of the way that I moved forward. And to be honest, doors just started opening, and the more I knocked, the more, what I would say, probably miracles happened. And I saw myself now operating in a space that advises corporates as well as not-for-profits as well as philanthropy on making a better and positive impact on the world.
I love that. So you're still playing a little bit in the not-for-profit space.
A little bit,
A lot of what you're doing is commercial. What would you say to people who say, "Peta, Christians shouldn't be in the commercial world. It's kind of evil out there. We should be helping the poor and doing those things rather than serving these corporations that are just trying to make money"? What would you say to people who would come at you with that kind of question?
What a great opportunity is what I would say.
Yeah.
What a great opportunity to be a light in a place that maybe is perceived to not be a light. And I remember as a very young person, a very dear friend of mine, and she's still a very dear friend of mine, said to me, "People are a little bit worried about you." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Well, you're hanging out with people that maybe you shouldn't be. And how's your faith going?" And at that point in time, my faith was flying. We were going great, the Lord and I. And I remember being slightly perplexed and shocked, and then wondering if I was doing the wrong thing, and then coming back to no, actually, who was Jesus hanging out with? And
got accused of exactly the same thing.
yeah. And so, that's probably a dramatic example of being in a light somewhere that maybe isn't perceived to be so.
Yeah, I think it's part of the deal for me is God's anointed us and appointed us and placed us in different areas to use our gifts and talents to reach those out in the marketplace, serve those, work with excellence and integrity, and just live our Christian life in front of people who probably won't go to church.
And I love it when people notice.
I think if you have a transformed life, people notice.
Yeah.
I think, and you get to answer the question. Yeah. Can you tell us, let's just go back a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your faith journey? You were raised in a Christian home, obviously.
I was.
I wasn't. So that was, it was just such a wonderful privilege to break a cycle of abuse and no knowledge of the Lord and see or endeavor to create a home life where Jesus was honored and hopefully your mum and I sort of tried to live that path and at least demonstrate that to one degree or another. But tell us a little bit about how you came to the Lord and some of your faith journey.
You would probably know a lot more of this story than I would because I was quite small. But I believe that originally I prayed a prayer with you on my bed when I was 7? Ish.
Yeah.
And from there grew exponentially in my faith, and part of that being nurtured in a Christian home. 2 things I would say. One was that I probably didn't start to own my faith for myself until I was about 16 or 17, which I'll share more about in a moment. But the other part of it was, for me, having role models in my life. And I don't think I've ever said this to you.
No, I don't think we've had this conversation, so I'm fascinated to see where this is going to land.
It's risky doing it in a public forum.
No,
Good on
right.
you.
That's right. It's just you and me.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah.
So, no, for me, having role models that really were so A, spirit-driven, and B, faith-driven. So you and Mum moved a family with 3 young kids at what most people would perceive to be a pretty pivotal time in their life to a completely different country, essentially because the Lord said so, in some eyes.
Yeah.
And for me as a young person to see that despite that not necessarily being an easier process for everyone, and to see you guys so faith-filled in doing that anyway has very much formed the way that I make decisions, the way that I view and discern what God would have for me and for those around me, and very much has given me a go-get-'em kind of attitude.
Awesome.
And it's you guys and others. I'm so fortunate and blessed to have people in my life that constantly speak into my life that I go to when I'm having a moment. And I know that not everyone has that. And so I do see, it's hard for me even to say out loud that I have access to those things because I know that a lot of people don't. So that would be a key part of my journey. And then, I think starting to see people in my life really own their faith kind of in that late teen stage, to see people that actually were living out their faith. They weren't just comprehending it. They weren't just understanding. They were actually living it out.
Yeah.
Those were kind of the 2 key things that saw me take steps in my faith and in my relationship with God.
I love that. Was there something specific when you said in your mid-teens, 16, 17, you kind of owned it for yourself? I mean, I think it's important to do that, by the way. I think we can be raised in a Christian home and have a Christian experience, but ultimately I think we need to, even if we make a decision early in life, I think it's good to own it and to decide to go ahead with it in a lot. I think people that teenage life are 20s and at that stage to really own it as your own. Was there anything specific in that time for you, or was it just a a sense of, as you said, recognizing other people doing the same kind of thing?
I think the latter, and definitely an evolution in my own life of what does it mean to hear from God.
Right.
And now I'm becoming an adult and I'm having to make my own decisions, and that becoming a reality in, other areas of life, that also became a reality in my life with Jesus, in my inner world, and in both the public sphere and the private one. And suddenly you find yourself in a position seeing that the decisions that you make in your faith life are actually the most important decisions you're going to make ever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a lot of pressure to put on, to put on myself as a young person.
Yeah.
And as someone that, always wants to make the right decision, I realized that it's now or never. And I really wanted to send it with my whole life for
I love
God.
that.
Yeah.
Because we talk about eternal consequences. And I think God looks for people who will surrender and be obedient to him even when it's not convenient.
Someone said to me a few years ago, obedience is God's love language.
Yeah, I think it is. I think as John says, if you love me, you'll basically do what you're told.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are quite ready to accept Jesus as saviour. There's a compelling argument, the fire insurance argument. There's a lot of upside as well here, obviously. But obedience, I think, is another whole level of Christian experience where we genuinely surrender ourselves to him and say, like, whatever you want to do with my life, let's do that.
Yeah. I'm here. Send me.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that challenges Christians. When you talk to them like that, they change the subject.
Yeah, that's right.
They're like, okay, that's a bit radical, Mark. Could we let's do something
Turn it down.
else? Turn it down a bit, buddy. Yeah. Talking of turning it down a bit, buddy. We operate, you and I, we both operate in commercial environments where often we're the only Christian. We're certainly not called in to do what we do by companies because they want a Jesus freak to come and help them out. And so we've got to be really good at what we do. How do you find mixing it up with a lot of non-Christians as they discover or you reveal that there's a faith element to your life? How do you navigate that, and what sort of response and reaction do you get from people?
It's so interesting what type of response you get in a world where you get cancelled for having a different opinion to someone else, and particularly when it comes to conversations around faith, that becomes extremely challenging in a work environment. I have found it often depends on how far into a relationship you are with, whoever it might be, whatever professional relationship we're talking about. Often early days, it's definitely eyebrows raised and people are maybe not sure about how to have conversations with you, maybe even how to be blunt with you, all the way through to, people might just start noticing either, just the way that you operate or, for us, we'll talk about this later, like our values and known impact was a massive prayer point for me for probably a year. And challenging the status quo in the most subtle ways, people start to notice that you maybe operate differently, whether that's in life or in work. And then they're often surprised that you're a Christian.
Like what?
Yeah, you're good at your job and, you've been helping us for the last, 2 years on this project or whatever it might be. And then they're often shocked. And I haven't been able to put my finger on what that is. Maybe it's that they haven't encountered someone who's a Christian in their world in a while.
Yeah.
It could be anything. Or the fact that you've even told them maybe is shocking to them because a lot of people wouldn't be that forward with it, I don't think, these days.
There's a lot of undercover Christians out there, and I can completely understand why
Totally
that is the case. I think we're all called to witness and share the gospel. I think if we overconstruct that, then it becomes a problem. It's like Amway, with all due respect to our multi-level marketing friends. If it's too contrived, it doesn't work. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be real. I think for me, evangelism it's a fruit, not a process. That if we're working with excellence, working with integrity, generally serving those around, loving people, we're part of the solution rather than part of the problem. We're in early, we're out late, we're doing the right thing, going the extra mile. If we're doing that, we're going to stand out, and people get to ask the question, "What the heck is wrong with you, Peter?" It's a question I've asked myself a lot. No,
fair enough.
So, I think we have to live it, but ultimately we do have to share it. But there's a lot of wisdom required, isn't there, now when to do that without, as you say, getting cancelled or spending all your time in front of HR. What it's occupational hazard, I think. Just why people go underground. What advice would you give to, say, young professional people going into the marketplace, trying to grow their careers and doing that, and feeling called to that when they're wrestling with how and when do I share my faith and how do I witness? What are your thoughts around that?
I would challenge you to go away with God and figure out what your business as usual is going to look like. What does it look like for you to operate in a way that is true to God, true to yourself, and then just do it? For us, and during the founding of Known, I was really challenged that I wanted our company to be one that is generous. You don't hear the word generous floated around the corporate space very often, unless it's, we've given away however many millions to whatever charity. Outside of that, you don't exactly hear the word generosity around. And that was, for me, I hope that people's experience of me is someone that's generous, and I wanted our organisation to look like that. And so for me, I want generosity to be business as usual. That is a normal heart posture to have in the workplace, and I want other people to see God in that. So my hope is that that's something that he's imparted to me, that then that is my contribution to the business as usual for me, the business as usual for the organisation that I run, and then the fruit of that being that people notice that something is different.
I love that. Like even the phrase going the extra mile is a biblical phrase, and Jesus talked about it. For those that may not know that story, the Romans had a rule that if you were a civilian, a Roman soldier could give you their pack, and the civilian had to carry it for a mile. And Jesus was saying, even with an occupying force, when they ask you to carry it a mile, carry it another mile, go the extra mile, which is like crazy level of servanthood, right? Just the epitome of everything you hate as an occupying force. And they're brutal, right? The Romans were brutal. And yet, no, serve them, love them, go the extra mile. Give them, if they ask for something, give it to them. And
it's also our current and present perception of what work is, right?
Yeah.
So again, this concept of service is not something that's thrown around the workplace. But as Christians, we are serving those around us. We are serving the Lord in doing what we're gifted to do or what we've been tasked to do. And as you say, going that extra mile is not, it's not the norm.
No, it's not. And it kind of goes against our human nature, right? So we do have to think about it and surrender those things. I think workplaces are great to help us grow. If we recognize God's called us into a workplace, then the things that happen to us there, we know are under his auspices. So if we park next to the awkward individual, we have a boss that's not ideal. How do we respond to that? And as we respond and surrender to those things around us, those circumstances, we can grow. We've been transformed into his image, and part of that is surrendering those areas and allowing the Holy Spirit to shift us and mold us and change us. And work's a great environment for that. There's always challenges. There's just crazy. There's lots of stuff going on. The other thing I would say that I've noticed about Christians in the workplace is they're a bit weird.
Oh, don't be weird.
Can we stop being weird?
Stop being weird.
Stop being weird. Agreed. Stop being weird. I love that. We seem to think we have to speak in a different language.
Yeah.
If we evangelize, we want to, it's 4 spiritual laws on breakfast, and then you turn up to morning tea, and you've got your 4-kilo Bible, including the Apocrypha, and it just doesn't work like that at all. I think we need to be fully engaged, and if we're aware of the Lord in that environment, we'll recognize the opportunities, and I think that's where the wisdom comes in.
Yeah, and I think living a spirit-led life is something. It's a lifestyle, I guess, that we choose to have.
Yeah,
and it doesn't have to look like bringing your 4-kilo Bible to lunch.
Yeah,
but it can look like having eyes and ears up to the Lord while you're having a conversation at lunch, and that will see, I hope for you and for me, so much fruit of God just doing his thing through us, because he doesn't need us, right?
Yeah.
He will make what he wants to see happen.
Yeah.
And it's a privilege to participate with him in that. And so if we're operating in our daily lives, being not weird, but knowing that we are part of an intricate kingdom with an almighty and sovereign God at the head of it, how cool that we get to participate in that in our work environment.
Wonderful. That's a great perspective, I think. Kingdom-minded, ear to the Lord, aware of his presence in the workplace, and that gives us an opportunity to recognize what he's doing. I do love what you said about he's more interested in people's salvation than we are. And we're just participating with that. It's an honor to do that. Well, it's been an honor to participate in this with you, Peter. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. But I have one last thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is often, I think, sometimes a little bit misunderstood and a little bit controversial. What's your take on the church and the role of the church as far as kind of releasing people into their vocations and out into the marketplace? This is where you feel called. What's your take on churches and how they operate in that space at the moment?
This is a great question. Church, I'm going to tackle this from 2 sides. And the first one is that for you and I in the workplace, church is not an add-on. It shouldn't be an add-on to our life. It's not the bolt-on, tack-on, optional extra subscription.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the capital C church here. And if we are living lives that are spirit-led and our whole lives are an offering and a worship to God, that we're worshiping in the way that we work, we're worshiping in the way that we, look after our families, we're worshiping in the way that we are, driving and not having road rage or whatever it might be, then church is absolutely a part of that. And I'm not saying that you now need to go and sign up for every possible thing so your whole entire week is full. What I'm saying is that if our whole lives are an offering and a worship to God, participating in his capital C church, whatever that might look like for you, and whatever community that you have around you that you're pouring into, that is also pouring into you, is a key part of having a really healthy life and a really healthy amount of challenge in your life and a really healthy amount of part of the growth that you can have in your faith. On the same coin, on the other side, churches are more and more so coming to acknowledge that this is a whole life thing that they're a part of.
Yeah.
Whereas it used to be, I think, churches are beckoning us to give all our time and our resources. Everyone as a community and as a kingdom, we need to acknowledge that we're all participating in different ways.
Yeah.
So if we had everyone working in full-time ministry in XYZ corners of the globe as far as a traditional ministry role is concerned. Let's put it that way. What Christians are going to be in the workplace? What Christians are in hospitality? Where are the Christians, photographers or whatever it might be? Everyone has a role to play. And if we all have a kingdom mindset, church and, the entity or the institution, if you like, of church included in that or community, then the world will be a very different place if we operate as a kingdom mindset.
Yeah. It unlocks the potential of the church, doesn't it? Church,
I think so.
like, us as believers. Because the old model of going out into the workplace, grabbing someone, arm wrestling them to go into a church to hear from the professional. People aren't doing it.
No.
It's not part of the social norms anymore. And I think we need to be salt and light wherever we are. We need to share the gospel wherever we are. We're probably going to have to disciple people outside the church before we bring them in. I think that's where it's going to end up. But I agree with you. We do need to be connected. And I know a lot of marketplace people have got disillusioned, separated out. I talk about the scattered church. And a lot of them are the doers, the people who worked really hard, in particularly before COVID, and then didn't go back. I'd really encourage those people to go back, stay connected. They're flawed institutions because they're made up of people.
Yeah.
And we need to give each other grace and mercy. I think the perspective of a lot of churches does need to change from the works of service. Pastors and teachers are there to prepare the saints for works of service. The works of service are not in the church, they're outside the church. And I think that's the difference. That if, as a body of believers, if we encourage each other to go into what we are called to do, our vocation, whether that's a priest or a plumber, equally valid, equally sacred, if we do what God's asking us to do, then the whole thing works. And the irony of that is, I think, if you release people like that, the churches will become full. So part of it is, I think, downgrading the necessity to spend a lot of time doing church-type things.
And it's all service.
It's all service.
It's all service.
Yeah.
If you are on the door at church on a Sunday, that's service. If you are putting together a slide deck for a client, that's service. And all of it should be done in a way that honors the Lord.
I think that's a great place to end. Peta Bilton, absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
You turned out well considering the gene pool and the obvious disadvantages you've had.
Look, it was a challenge, but no.
So great to see you. Thank you for spending some time with us. God bless you.
Thanks.
Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening and watching. I trust you enjoyed this latest podcast. Please like and subscribe. That really helps support the channel. And if you're interested in more information or you're on your Monday journey, you want to have Monday mastery, please check out our website at mondaymovement.com. All the links are below. Until next time, thanks for watching.